How many trades have you got left for SuperCoach this year? Have you got a boost left? Because chances are, if you got a boost and a bit of cash and some trades, you could really fly home. If you've gone through and used them all, oh boy, it is the last kind of 100 hours in your SuperCoach world has been chaotic. Nick Martin, ACL, done for the year and has been a really handy defensive forward for us. Jason Horne-Francis, done TBD based on the injury report, but it sounds like he's done for the rest of the year. And at time of this episode being recorded and released, at least at the moment, Tristan Cherry's out too. So those are three big impact players, let alone a Connor Rozee, who is questionable, and all the other pain points that could come as we now hit the final 6 weeks of the year and teams start kind of cotton wooling some players. Regardless, here at the Coaches Panel, if you've got some trades left in SuperCoach, I'm going to navigate you through my top 10 trade targets of the week. I'm going to give you some cheap options. I've got some top-of-the-line guys, and will specifically help you with the guys that are in the right sweet spot of price and the need points you might have. Let's go with my number one trade target of the week, Jack McCrae. His ownership strong across the formats in 43%, but it's 60% in the top 1%. So really handy. And it's a little bit of cash off of Nick Martin, like 60K if you're an owner there. So it's not super easy, but St Kilda alongside Sydney have a magnificent fixture run from now to the end of the year for inside mids. And McCrae's the one that's kind of sneaking under the radar in some people's eyes. And this matchup that he's got this week, on paper, is the only difficult one from now to the end of the year. However, when he played them earlier in the year, he got a 162 on them. Now, a lot has changed in the Geelong makeup and St Kilda, but if you're looking for who I think is going to be the number one forward from now to the end of the year, McCrae probably sits in that sweet spot if you're allowing fixture to be the driver. He's probably that guy that while 60% of the 1% in terms of rank have him, he's probably the one that you feel the most nervous going against. So to me, this is a really handy pick. I'm happy to jump in because after this Geelong matchup, which he does have good history this year against, after that, it's just all gravy. I'd absolutely jump on top of it. If you don't have that amount of cash, but maybe a little bit less, and you're looking for more unique, but you're still looking for a guy with ceiling, can I present to you a player that was in the top 10 last week? I've jettisoned him right at the front. Again, if you've got the forward issues of Horne-Francis and also Martin, this is going to help you out. But Gryan Miers is my number 2 trade target. He's in just 3% of teams that are currently sitting inside the top 1% of rank, and he's coming off the back of a 134. If you look at the last 5 rounds for all forwards, he's ranked number 2, only behind Luke Jackson. And he's got an awesome fixture to finish the year. He's got a Tigers game in the final matchup of the year, and he's still got North Melbourne, and he's got an incredibly injury-depleted Essendon. Even last week, which was a more toughish matchup, he's dropping a 134. So he's playing this great high half forward link-up role, and we know how important he is to their inside 50 ball movement and score involvements. He's got ceiling, and he's unique, and he's got a great fixture to come. To me, this is one of the better picks that you could be potentially making. But if you're flushed for cash, and I mean you got to be flushed for cash, then if you're trading out a suspended Tristan Cherry, there's only one that is the one that's getting away. I'm talking about Brody Grundy. Over $700,000. In fact, he's $120,000 more expensive than the next player in SuperCoach. So you need to have some serious bank to be able to get there, and not a lot of coaches in their luxurious position. But it's why he's so tempting, because not only is he so expensive because he's been so good over the last sort of 5 to 8 weeks, but he's also relatively unique inside the upper percentages of the top ranked teams. Just 15% of teams have him in that top 1%. So, yeah, this is not a cheap play, but this is the most informed player in the competition. I talked about how expensive he is, contrast to a Zach Butters. Zach Butters is the number 2 ranked player in the last 5 rounds overall. Who's number 1? It's Brody Grundy. And he is, I didn't stutter, 30 points per game better in the last 5 rounds. It has been a dynamite pick for anyone that has him. And then on top of this, 4 of his next 6 matchups are unbelievably, brilliantly green for Ruckman. And one of those 2 more challenging is against North Melbourne, who are letting Bryn Teakle come and take the ruck role. That's the hardest matchup that he's got coming up against him. And based on his current form, that's nothing to be worried about anyway. So this is not an every team's ability to move. And nor would I advocate killing your team to get there, because politely, you probably don't have the cash to get it. You probably don't have the sacrificial trade to pull it off, nor would I do if you're doing a double combination of Horn, Francis, Martin, and Cherry. If you've got 2 of those issues, I couldn't advocate for dropping down to a fieldable 200, 300,000 type player in that forward line just to be able to afford Brodie, because while he's 30 points per game better off on current trend, he has to keep going 150s to be able to have it worthwhile. The scary thing is all the indicators, all the things that you would leverage to say he could do it are in play. But spending that much cash on one player when you don't really have the available trades to generate that cash and all that cash on your bench, it's really hard to justify. But if you can do it, everything points to it being a continued knockout selection. My number 4 trade target, I'm getting a guy that over his last 3 weeks is going in an average of 93, but his seasonal average is knocking on the door of 120. I'm talking about Luke Jackson. Look, wasn't great last week, an 84 for his team, and 2 of the next 3 are relatively tough matchups, but in and around those matchups for Luke are actually some really favourable ones for both inside mids, which he plays at times, rucks, which he plays at times, and kind of key position forward, which he also plays at times. One of the more challenging of these matchups that he does have over the next 3 weeks is Collingwood, his opponent this week. But if there is a glimmer of hope for you, he did score a 112 on them earlier this year. So that's favourable. But I think the benefit that coaches looking at this is going, okay, 600,000's not cheap, not exactly unique. 1 in 4 teams own him overall. I understand that. But what he at least is going to give you is flexibility across both the ruck line and the forward line. And let alone then what you could do at flex. And coaches that have flexibility and depth this year, I feel like they are the ones that are going to win it all. And so if you've got the ability to get into Luke, like I said, there's 2 of his next 6 aren't great matchups. He's got an okay scoring history against one of them based off 2025 scores earlier this year. But if you're looking for a guy that could be in your ruck, could be in your forwards, could be thrown into the flex spot and you loop some options, I think versatility of opportunity feels the most favourable move this year. So if you want someone that can play in 3 of those lines, I'm pretty happy to lock Luke Jackson away as my number 4 trade target. And then I'll hit you with my number 5. There was a point in time he was up at that $700,000 price point earlier this year. He's now dipped under 600,000. I'm talking about Max Gawn. His last 3, he's going in an average of 93, including a ton last week. But if you put it in perspective, and that's what you always have to do when a player has a couple of poor scores in a row, the narrative of how they got there is the most important. And he's come up in those 3 games against 3 of the most difficult 5 ruck matchups. And the Blues aren't great this week, who he's currently playing. I'll grant you that. However, he's under 600,000. He's one of the best scoring players in SuperCoach at the moment. Pitternet, okay. De Koning, okay, you don't ever like the double option against him. And again, the last 5, the Blues have been one of the more restrictive rucks. But if you can navigate your way through this week, there is an extra bit of love on the other side. because there are only 2 teams that are giving plus 20 matchups this year in SuperCoach over the last 5 using DVP. Plus 20 on average above what they're delivering. Those teams are Rucks against St Kilda, Rucks against West Coast. Who does Max have after the Blues this week? Yes, friends, you're picking it up. He's got West Coast, he's got St Kilda. The best 2 matchups, not just in Ruck, but of all of SuperCoach in the last 5 rounds, he has them. And so he's under 600,000. He's been 100K more than what he is. If now is the point in time you're like, I'm getting off X, I'm getting into not just an affordable ruck, I'm getting who the best of the best is, and I can't justify going up 150,000 more to Grundy. Imagine what Gawn versus 150K upgrade could do for you as opposed to Grundy outright. Sometimes you've got to look at the combination, not just the isolation of one pick. I'm happy to put Max in at number 5. So my top 5, McCrae, Meyers, Grundy, Jackson, Gawn. Those are my top 5. Then let's start venturing into creative territories for you. We've already talked on this Trade Target episode about just some of the cash-strapped elements that teams are sitting in. And so let me give you somebody that, whether it be you're trying to deal with that 3-headed issue of one of Cherry, Martin, Horne-Francis, and I'm not even touching Connor Rosie's potential absence this round, let alone if you're running a McCarthy as your 23rd premium in flex, whatever it is. Maybe you're cash strapped and you're like, MJ, I got 1 trade left. I've got little to no cash to move. I just need 1. Or I can get this 1 player here, but basically I can't spend any money on upgrading a Cherry. Okay, let's help you. Kieran Briggs. Let's talk you through why it is. In the last 5 games, he's going an average of 103. 4 of his last 5 games are 90 plus. And this week he's got the ruck matchup against Essendon. Super favourable. They've also then got in the final round of the year a super favourable matchup against St Kilda. I just listed that stat of how good Rucks are scoring against St Kilda at the moment. But in between this week and the end of the year round, it ain't great. But you're dealing in under 450,000. So beggars can't be choosers. So if you've got no cash to work with, and the only way is I'm going to take Cherry into Briggs, and whatever I got left, I'm going to fix the rest. This is about as good as you're going to get based on current scoring form and good matchups this week. If you're narrow in your options, Briggs is about as good as it can get for you. My number 7 trade target, let's hit the defensive line for you. It's the one line we haven't got of available players just yet. McCrae's DPP, so at least can hit the mids through that spot. Don't worry, I've got a premium mid I'm going to talk to you about right at the end. But Locky Whitfield, under 500,000. 48% of the top 1% of coaches have their hands on him, and he's coming up against the injury-depleted Essendon this week, who in his last 2 meetings against them, he's scored 100 plus. This is the kind of game you could really see both Lockies dominating with playmaking. He pushes up high. Essendon are the type of team that turn the ball over a lot. As they're entering the ball in their forward half, a player like Locky Whitfield could really dominate. Now, the Thursday night matchup might not be ideal for you, but the reality is he's super cheap. I know that break-even is daunting at 173, but you can't really focus on the break-even. You've got to start looking at who's got a great fixture over the next 6 weeks, and for wing half-back type players in which Locky sits in that category, it's as favourable a matchup as anybody's going to get, and it's under 500k. Not too much off the back of all the players you might be considering or moving off onto. I really like Locky Whitfield as a trade move for you. My number 8 trade target, let's come back to the forward line where a lot of the issues are sitting for us this week. I want to present to you Sam Darcy. Over the last 5 weeks, he's the 11th highest averaging forward. Now, he's got the Lions this week, which you might think that's not a great matchup. Well, on the last 5 games, it's a marginally plus matchup for rucks and for forwards. He kind of plays a bit of both, more forward than ruck. But after this week, again, that's not a bad matchup. But after this, he comes up against Essendon. Again, injury depleted and a top 5 easiest matchup over the last 5 rounds for key position forwards. Alongside that, he comes up against Melbourne. Again, you might go, that's a terrible matchup. But in the last 5 weeks, they're the number 2 easiest team for key position forwards to score on. And he's got an Eagles game to go. Alongside the fact that it's negligible cash to move via a Martin or a Horne-Francis. And he's got ceiling about him. I still think the Dogs play finals given how favourable this fixture is. And if you've got little to no money to play with for forward manoeuvres you need to make, Darcy's the kind of guy, based on average, based on pedigree, I feel like he could walk away with a 95 to a 110 average range based on this 6 weeks game of trends. And I think that's enough, given you're not spending another $100,000 like you are if you're looking inside a player like a former teammate in Jackson McCrae. Last 2 options I've got for you. Remember, the deal is if I mention one player that you are trading into, you have to like the video and you have to subscribe to the channel. So if you haven't done that and I've hit someone in the first 8, time to fix that up. Let's go to my number 9 trade target. It is Caleb Daniel. It's getting dire straits, but again, we've got to start looking for some little bit of value in the ranges that we are in. 70% of the top 1% of ranked coaches have their hands on him, so it's not unique. And the break even and the average are pretty much negligible, and again, sits in the same scope of a Sam Darcy where you go, look, if you don't have much or any money at all to jump off these players, this is as favourable as a score as you can get. And the main reason I'd be looking at Caleb here is look at the fixture of who North Melbourne have over the next 6 weeks. It's as favourable as you could ask for in this price range for players that are playing in this halfback role using DVP. There's some good matchups that are in there. I actually really quite like this shout. Now, not as much as Darcy, not as much as Jackson, not as much as Meyers, not as much as McCrae. But if you've got all those names and you still need something cheap, Caleb sits in that spot. It's not pretty, it's not fun, it's not amazing. But I'd rather this than a Flanders. I'd rather this than a Humphrey. I'd rather this than some of those sort of other options I'm seeing across social media. Given the fixture that's sitting there, I think this can be something you can bank on if you had to go there. And then the last of my top 10 trade targets. This is luxury territories, but I still think we've got to talk about him. I wanted to put him higher, but there are some reasons I cannot. The number 10 option to trade into this week is Marcus Bontempelli. This will be the last week he's under 600,000. The fact that he's under that is clearly due to some subs that happened when they were managing his injury and workload back. While only in just over 1 in 3 teams overall, 93% of the top ranked coaches have their hands on him. So if you're inside that top 1% and don't own Bont, it's starting to hurt. He went 174 last week, again, a matchup that wasn't favourable. And so if you're the one not on Bont and he's knocking that out in some hard matchups, which the Crows are for inside mids, I do not want to be you. Actually, kind of do. It helps my chances in the top 1% that little bit more. The reason he's at 10 and not any higher, because everything screams now's the time, is he does have Brisbane this week. And he hasn't scored a ton against Brisbane since 2022. So the fixture of history against this opposition isn't amazing. And I do expect a player like a Dunkley to do some run with roll on him. But as I said last week, the matchup wasn't great against the Crows. And yet he still knocks out a 174. So if there's anyone that's going to break DVP or historical scoring or fixtures at a ground and averages and all the data points we look to justify selecting or not a player, Bont feels like the unicorn that could break that. And at under 600,000 this week, he will not be there next week. And next week, he plays Essendon. Feasting for days. The Bulldogs have a great run home. There are certain players you just don't want to be against in SuperCoach. And continuing to opt out of Bontempelli when it's presenting itself to you as clear value, Oh, I do not want to be you. And so the reason he's low is I don't think it's a high positional priority for a lot of coaches. And I also think the recent history is enough of a reason to drop him down the order. But he has to still be there, because if there's one player under 600,000 that from now to the end of the year could go 130, this is the guy that could do it. And gosh, I'm nervous if I don't own Marcus Bontempelli. So those are my top 10 trade targets for the week. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. Comment below and let me know how many trades you got left and what trades are you making this week. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We hope it's helped you right throughout this year, let alone this week with the trade decisions you're making in SuperCoach. We can't wait to be back with you again next week with another SuperCoach trade targets. But if you play AFL Fantasy, earlier in the week, we drop a top 10 trade targets for that platform too. You can check it out. And of course, also on the channel is our weekly strategy session. Make sure you go and check those out. Inside the description of this episode are all the details of where you can get in touch with us across socials, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, and also join our Patreon and gain some extra exclusive content. It is all inside that space, inside the description of this video. Thanks for tuning in. We can't wait to be chatting with you again on the channel real soon.